folks, Ariel over here at Finest. Today I'm just throwing together a kind of quick dessert. Can't claim that this is particularly healthy or anything of the kind. It's just yummy. I don't know where I first came across this recipe or who it was from. It's something I've been making for many years now. I'm going to start out with a couple cups of flour, and yep, I'm being lazy and just using grocery store flour because I didn't take the time to make my own. Sometimes when you're trying to get a lot of projects done outdoors and still have some homemade stuff, including some treats sometimes, you just make some compromises. Anyhow, so we got a couple cups of flour. We are going to do some baking powder. This is for going to do a 9 by 13 size pan. If you do half this, you can do it in one of those little square baking dishes. So we're going to do a teaspoon of baking soda and a teaspoon of baking powder. And a cup of sugar. We're just going to mix all those dry ingredients together real quick. And then put half a cup or 1 stick of butter in here. The butter paper makes an excellent way to grease your baking dish. I like to just chop that butter up a tiny bit. Then, since I'm not using a mixer, I'm going to use this tool, which is a pastry blender, and kind of get the butter cut into there. If you were using a blender, you would probably cream your butter and sugar together, and I could pull out the KitchenAid, but I don't feel like it, so I'm doing it this way. I haven't found this kind of cake to be nearly sensitive enough for me to care about any difference it makes anyhow. So we're just getting our butter into kind of fine-ish chunks there. Make sure we don't lose our goodies on there. And now we're going to do wet ingredients. And this recipe is great for using up slightly shriveled apples. You see what those guys look like? This is what happens to fruit in our dry climate. It rarely spoils, it simply dehydrates. If I left that sit on the counter long enough, it would turn the whole way into a whole dried apple, most likely. But since they've gotten a little bit over the hill for most, the most pleasurable stage of fresh eating, they are this is an excellent way to use up something like that. So I'm going to just dice them into here. These, by the way, are my favorite paring knives, which I've mentioned before. This one has a slightly curved blade, and I have a bunch of ones that are straight, but I have been using these little Rada cutlery knives my whole life. I grew up around a lot of people who raised families of 10 or 14 children using the same sets of paring knives for many, many decades. For their price, you can find them on Amazon last I checked for, depending which set you want, 10, 12, 15 bucks. And for something that can do all of the fruit and veggie cutting and paring and preparing and preserving that I do in the course of a year, and they're very easy to sharpen when you need to, and they just last forever. I think they're the absolute best value out there in the world of kitchen knives. If I remember, I'll link to them down below. If I forget, I think if you go to amazon.com/shopfineth, they're listed there. Anyway, they're an awesome little kitchen tool. If you haven't got any kitchen knives and you're thinking of getting something, I don't think you'll regret it if you go with these. So once we dice our apples in here, then we're going to add the rest of our wet ingredients. Now, normally I just do apples, but since I have a bunch of these and I want to use some of them, and I like fruit, I'm also going to add dried cherries, which I had been soaking in some, I poured some warm water over them earlier today, and so they would rehydrate a little because I didn't want to make my cake too dry. So I'm just going to pour that water off and we're going to add the cherries. This could certainly be done with just apples, and that is how I have done it most often, actually. But I was actually given a whole bunch of dried cherries, and so I'm using them. So the rest of our wet ingredients, we're going to add a couple eggs, fresh from our chickens. And nice and fertile. I'm hoping Blackie's going to hatch out a bunch of chicks, because every egg I crack, I can see we've got fertilized eggs. And we feed the shells back to them as well once they dry out a little bit, just crumble them back up. So we've got a couple eggs. We're going to do a little bit of vanilla. This is our homemade vanilla extract. You can find the video on how to do that if you want to make some of your own. I'm going to do about a teaspoon of vanilla, probably a generous teaspoon, since I've got plenty. And the original recipe called for sour cream. I don't happen to have any. What I'm going to use is yogurt. This is another one of the things I like to emphasize when doing most cooking. Even for something like baking, which is a little bit more precise than, say, doing soups, there's still a ton of things you can substitute. If you did not want to or have sour cream or yogurt, I do know that's not a wet measuring cup, I just had it already dirty and didn't want to make another one. You could also do more egg instead. You could do applesauce instead, and all of them would give you little variations, but they all would also work and make a delicious cake. So there's almost always I can make whatever I want with something that's around the place, even if it's not the exact thing that a recipe might happen to call for. And that bright yellow color is from how bright the egg yolks are. You should probably start your oven a little bit earlier than I did. I tend to not start mine very far ahead because it heats up really quick with this propane oven. And I heard it light, but with propane I always still check and be sure I can actually see a flame so that I know it is lit. So, to butter our baking pan, or to grease it, if you simply keep the wrapper off of your butter, you can do this. Get the corners first, because that's the corners and cracks. That's the most likely place something's going to stick. You just do that, and then this makes an excellent fire starter when you're done with all that. Or you could compost it. That one's going to go in the fire. So, we're going to put our cake into our pan here. And then we're going to sprinkle a little topping on it. And I'm sure by the time we are done with that the oven will be plenty warm. We're baking this at 350. Just smooth this out a little bit. It's not going to look real smooth because of all our very chunky fruit in there, and I'm sure you could use whatever kind of fruit you wanted. But like I said, this is one of my favorite ways to use up stuff that I have around, whether it's a wrinkling apple or dried cherries or whatever. So for our topping, let's just set that out of the way temporarily and move a few things. I'm going to use some pecans. You could use any kind of nut you like. Pecans are one of my favorites. Walnuts would also be very good for this. Normally when I'm cooking and not trying to make a video of it, I'm doing like a whole bunch of things at the same time, which makes it hard for me to be organized and clear and concise sometimes when I'm trying to do one of these. But we're going to just chop these pecans up so they're not super big. You can make these as chunky or as fine as you prefer. I don't mind some texture, and if you were actually allergic to all nuts, you could totally leave this topping off and it would still be a fine cake. I'm allergic to peanuts, but they of course are not a true nut. They're a legume, and I don't fortunately have any problem with tree nuts. So there's our pecans. To mix this topping, we're just going to dump them into this little bowl. Get all the yummy nut dust in there, and we're going to mix that with just a little cinnamon, about a teaspoon, something like that, more or less as you please, and a little bit of brown sugar. I thought I might have to go to the bigger pantry to get one, but I thought I had a little bit left in there. So we're going to do about half a cup of brown sugar in the top here. And again, I'm not precisely measuring that at all. Brown sugar is another thing that'll dry out to being rock hard. I know in some places it'll get soggy and turn into a solid lump. If you don't roll that up and seal it kind of well here, it'll dry out into a hard powder from the dry air. And then we're going to put just a little bit of butter in here, enough to stick this stuff together. Let's say a tablespoon or so. And just going to mix that right into my nuts and sugar. Well, yep, taking a peek in there at my oven thermometer, and the oven is almost up to temp. guys will have to tell me down below what your favorite cake recipe is. I'm not a big fan of most cakey kinds of cakes, if that makes sense, but I do enjoy something like this coffee cake that's very moist with lots of fruit. And if you want another good cake recipe for this time of year, go check out the video I did on making a cake with stinging nettles. It's about, our nettles are just starting to sprout up out of the ground here, so I'll probably be doing some more videos using them for some things soon, but they can kind of like making zucchini cake or carrot cake. They can make a wonderful and nutritious and beautiful green cake in the spring, so you should try that. Only, of course, pick them with gloves on if you've never been around nettles before. There's a reason they're called stinging nettles, though they don't sting anymore as soon as they are either heated or dried, so they're not going to sting you when you eat the cake. Okie doke. So we're going to sprinkle our topping here. I've said this before, when you're trying to top something, if you try to get all your topping on the edges and corners first, in my experience, then the middle kind of ends up, by the time you're done with that, mostly full. If you start with the middle, you end up with it all there and none at all on the edges. At least that's how it seems to go for me. So we are going to pop this in the oven and let it bake for the recipe says 25 to 30 minutes. I always check at the short end of that to be sure I haven't overdone it. We're going to set that for 25 minutes and check back. Okay, we did check this at 25 minutes. It was definitely not done. So give it another 5 here. Let's see if a toothpick comes out clean now. Perfect. Okie doke. There is a beautiful pan of coffee cake.
We hope you enjoyed it.
Come back next time for more adventures.
Thanks for watching.